Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today about our great report. If you have watched any of our webinars before done by me, then you know that I'm a huge fan of this tool. And so it's always a pleasure for me to just, somehow share the news about it and just somehow hopefully also share some enthusiasm about it because, it's just a wonderful tool to evaluate your room acoustics, to also make sure that your placement of your speakers is correct. And it can show you a lot of things that can be optimized. It can help you if you are planning room acoustic treatment. For example, if you think about using bass traps, using absorbers, or just, as said, want to change a few things in your room. So this is what we will talk about today. And basically, I will give you an overview about what is presented in the Great Report. And then we will just, dig into each of these paragraphs and also these diagrams and a lot of data. And I would just want to make sure that you are able to understand what these data is showing and just to get the best out of you, out of your studio and your experience. And therefore, we also will have a look at a lot of examples from reports so that I just show you a few diagrams and also some data that we have collected from a lot of rooms, just to give you an impression how you can analyze these data. And what's also very important, this is a live webinar, so it's possible for you to ask questions and just, use the comment functions on the platforms you are looking this webinar on. And in the end, we will just have a short Q&A and we will discuss your questions. So my friendly assistant from Finland, Jaakko, will just then bring up your questions and I will try my best to answer them in detail. If we will not be able to answer all of them, make sure that we will check them on the platforms and we will then respond to them there. Also important, just have fun, enjoy listening to that. And you can always reach us directly if you have any questions after that under support@genelec.com. I will also show this email address later on. Perfect. And now it's time to bring up what always is part of the presentations, the famous PowerPoint slides, but it's just a good tool for webinars in general. Yeah, we just called this webinar Know Your Working Space. So learn about your working space and understand what's happening with the acoustics of your working space. Therefore, we created this wonderful tool, GRADE, and GRADE stands for Genelec Room Acoustic Data Evaluation. And of course, the word grade, for those of you who are native speakers, this is absolutely obvious. For the others, also means that you somehow can give a grade for something. So if you go to school, you will get a grade for a test, for example. So it has these two perspectives of using it. We introduced it with GLM 4, and you might know that now we are using GLM 5. Actually, 5.1 has just been released. If you did not update yet, you can just find it in your My Genelec account. Just log in and then go to Services and Software, and then you can find the installers. And the way you access the grade report is now a little different compared to the times of version 4. So nowadays, it's really important, first of all, that you log in to your account in GLM. So log into My Genelec under Services and do this before the calibration. Otherwise, the data is not there and it's not available for the creation of the grade report. The next step is run your calibration and then make sure that you enter the correct dimensions of your room. There's sometimes some confusion about these room dimensions because actually they do not affect the calibration at all. So no matter what you enter here, the calibration itself will be exactly the same. Just because we analyze the sweeps from your speakers and they are recorded with the microphone, and then the decisions of AutoCal are made, and they have no relation to the actual room size. But these dimensions do matter for the grade report because we show you, for example, the ITU relevance or how close you are to these ITU I would say the ITU recommendations. And therefore, it's important, for example, that we know the size of your room because the reverberation time, for example, can, of course, be shorter if it's a smaller room, and it can get longer if it's a larger room. So this is why we ask for these dimensions. If you have a more complex shape, so it's not a rectangular room, something, with a roof and all of these things, just do a rough estimation. So this doesn't have to be, absolutely precise. Just try to somehow match the dimensions. And for example, also make sure to match the room volume, because this is also in the end what counts, just to give you an idea of how good you are within these ITU recommendations. And after the calibration, you can then select grade report order. This is also found in the services menu. And you will see this window. Once again, you are asked if you want to do a grade report for your latest calibration. At the moment, it's only possible to do the grade report for the latest calibration. This might change. At the moment, it's also only possible then, of course, that you are using the group you just calibrated. And some people already asked for if it would be possible, for example, if you have 4 groups, that you can just start with group 1 was this placement, group 2 was the second placement, that you can just select the groups and then order the grade reports for these groups. And we are actually working on that. So hopefully this will be available soon. What you also can see at the moment, we already tell you remaining grade reports, 12. You already might know if you do your grade reports, the 12 will just stay very stable. So at the moment, we don't do anything. So if you want to do a lot of free grade reports, it's up to you now. Just do it. This will change. And we make sure, of course, that the pricing will be very fair. But of course, there's a lot of work in the background that has had to be done for the grade report, especially in our research and development team. So countless hours, weeks, months of work. And therefore, I think it's understandable that at some point, we just will have to charge people, especially if they do, let's say, hundreds of grade reports. I think with 12 as a starting point, you can already do a lot of things. You can really try out different positions. You can really compare different room acoustic treatments. And I think most of you will be perfectly happy with 12. What I also want to say, because some people already asked about it, of course, the basic calibration in GLM. So everything that is just related to calibrating your speakers will, of course, always be free. Yeah, there are no plans at all that we would start, hey, you now did 10 calibrations for your speakers, and number 11 will cost you that amount of money. So this is just related to the grade report, as said, because it was a special feature. And if you just look on the market, we are the absolutely only ones who can offer you something like that. Otherwise, you will have to start running Room EQ Wizard, and you will have to spend hours to just analyze the diagrams. And you still would not have, for example, the really helpful texts explaining what's going on. So hopefully this is understandable. It has a huge value. And if you need a lot of them, and it will be a really fair pricing, I think everyone should be fine with that. Yeah, and after you did this, you just get the message in a few minutes. Your grade report will be sent to your email address. In this case, it's my email address. And usually it is indeed, I think, 1 to 2 minutes. So it's really, really fast. And then you just will find a PDF in your email account. And the PDF looks like this. So of course, it's dependent on the size of your system. So for example, for a stereo system, you usually get around 30 pages. And if it's a larger immersive system, it can easily reach 100 pages, because then every speaker is just listed and shown. And this makes this report even more more interesting and more powerful, and you can read much more than out of it. The chapters are always the same because we always cover the same topics here. So and now just let's start with how can we evaluate results. We always start very easy, or try to make it as easy as possible, with showing the basic categories and then giving you a rating using colors. So green usually means excellent, very good. Orange, good, absolutely still acceptable. And if you see red, this is also not the end of the world. So there's no reason for, selling your house or selling or just renting a new room. Red only means that there's room for improvement and that you can just think about how this could be done. And the basic categories we show is always the so-called operational room response. This is the frequency response you are getting. Then we rate your early reflections level. And of course, the lower, the better. So for example, if it's below -10, you always get the green, because this means that early reflections are just not as loud as the direct sound, and therefore they don't cause that much coloration to the sound. A very, very interesting topic is early versus late. I will also, of course, show this to you in detail later on, because this shows the ratio between direct sound from your speakers in relation to the diffuse sound field. So just to explain it, sound that is reflected and just reaches your ears later than 20 milliseconds after the direct sound. And of course, in the studio, we want to make sure that we are listening to the recording. So what's coming out of the speakers? I'm not interested in listening to my own room and what my own room is adding. And therefore, I'm always a fan of course, having a high amount of direct sound compared to the diffuse sound. If you are more into hi-fi, and usually, for example, you're sitting in a living room with no acoustical treatment except some, sofas, and usually you are also sitting a little further away, like 2, 3, 4 meters, you will see that easily the room sound can dominate. So this corridor between early sound and late sound will get really small. And then we have a look at the T60 flatness. This is something that tells you how reverberant your room is, because T60 means the time that it takes for a sound to decay by 60 dB. So just to get 60 dBs lower. So for example, if a room is very reverberant, these T60 times can be quite long. So 1-2 seconds. And if it's a good treated studio room, it can be really short, like 0.2, for example, is something. And then also always of interest is the so-called deepest notch below 300, because this is something we cannot handle with the calibration. If you have seen the first episodes of these webinars, you already know it. We can deal with boosts, but we cannot deal with dips. So if there are dips below 300 Hertz, we will have to talk about room acoustic treatment and about better placement of the speakers. Therefore, this is also listed here. And this is just, two examples. Actually, they are quite similar. So you can see, for example, even if the early versus sound ratio is only 4 dBs corridor, you still get the green. So the next slide shows you how these colors somehow are generated. So at what values you get what color grading. Yeah, you can call it like this. And as said, if you have some reds, there's hope for you. So no need to get depressed. So let's start with the frequency domain analysis. This is the frequency responses. And this is something you already know if you are using GLM, because you can see this in GLM as well. So this just shows you the frequency response of your speaker at your listening position. First of all, the red curve shows you the reality in your room before calibration. For example, this is once again an example from my small room with two huge modal influences at approximately 60 and 120 Hertz. And 120 Hertz, for example, would be more than, I think 17 or 18 dBs too loud, just because of the dimensions of this small room. And you can imagine if I would mix with this red curve, no chance to do anything that translates to other systems, because I would reduce this heavily, and on another system where this is not the case, or another room, it would sound very thin. So I would never be sure that my bass range is correct. So you see the second curve is the blue curve, which means the filters we use in GLM to compensate for that, and green is the resulting one. On the right side, you can easily compare that, for example, this measurement would be a little more critical, because after calibration, you see I'm getting almost a neutral flat response on the left side. On the right side, you still realize there's one big dip at around 1980-70 Hertz. Yeah? And as said, even if we use some, white positive gain here, these things are caused by cancellations due to reflections from surfaces like the back wall, the side wall, the floor, the ceiling. And if I would boost this range, I would also boost the reflection. So in the end, it would just look exactly the same. So if I would see something like this, I would first of all think, okay, is there a better placement? For example, is the speaker not close to the back wall? Otherwise, if I cannot optimize the speaker's position, I could think about adding a subwoofer that takes care of this range up to 100, for example. Next example is even worse. So if I see something like that, as you can see, it's not even within the -15 range. It's even lower. So the cancellation is really huge. And it also looks like that 1, 2, 3 cancellations just add up to get, this really, deep abyss, I would call it, like in the wonderful movie by James Cameron. So to deal with this abyss, we will have to really talk about placement of the speakers. On the right side, one more example, also showing a dip, but this is a really small one, and it's also not very wide. So for, let's say, regular listening and just, for example, enjoying hi-fi music, to be honest, this would be acceptable because it's a really narrow one. For really critical listening and, of course, studio work, I would still try to get rid of this. Once again, for example, by adding a subwoofer. Talking about subwoofers, of course, this is a perfect example now. It took me some time to find this, but it's possible. A subwoofer has the huge advantage that you place it on the floor, close to the wall, and therefore the floor reflection is not critical because it's in phase somehow, and the back wall is also not critical. So two of critical parts are already sorted out, and therefore if you just spend some time with trying out different positions for your subwoofer, you can end up with something like this. So after calibration, perfect flat, really with, in this case, it's just 1 or 2 dB. And this is excellent because then you can really also use the complete range for the crossover. You know, I could start at 60, but I can easily also choose 100, which would help me with the speakers you just saw, where the dip was at, for example, 80 or 70. So always, you know, spend your time with the subwoofer. This is very, very important. And also one thing that you always can try out. Usually you know that, of course, the bass driver of the subwoofer is just facing to the front. So it's just looking at you somehow. But you can also try out to turn the subwoofer around. So really that the bass driver is pointing towards the wall. The only thing you have to make sure is that you have approximately 10 to 15 centimeters distance. So if you push it really to the wall, then you get problems. But if you have this 10 to 15 centimeters, this can make a difference really in the way the frequency response looks like, because the subwoofer then has, so the bass driver of the subwoofer has a different position compared to if it's facing you. So this is just the secret trick. We also show peaks and notches, and now important, this is before calibration. So this is, for example, useful for anyone planning acoustical treatment, because then you can see where somehow the problematic frequency ranges are. And you can see we always have arrows pointing upwards. They show the boosts, and then arrows pointing downwards, showing the dips. And you already know the downwards arrows are, you know, the bad guys. They are, it's harder to treat them. Of course, you can also see this in a table. So we just list this. So you can also get, for example, a feeling for, let's say you have a huge boost at 60 hertz. And then you could think about it, let's say, what type of bass trap do I need to really treat 60 hertz? Then you might find out this is a huge one, or a very specialized one with, you know, a membrane that is tuned to this frequency. But this is a critical. So therefore, for example, it would make sense that you just make sure that you use the calibration to just get rid of this one. If it's a higher one, let's say 120 or 100, then more standard bass traps could already be of huge help and could be a really useful investment then. In general, I already mentioned that if we have these boosts and also, of course, these dips, we always have to think about the modal influences of the room. And this is especially important below the so-called Schröder frequency. And Schröder frequency defines the frequency below which the modes somehow have a huge influence on what we hear. And it depends on the room and also on the reverberance of the room. But in a lot of rooms, for example, Schröder frequency is around 200, 250, 300 hertz, around that. And in that range, the modes have a huge influence. As you have seen, for example, in my small room, this mode is at 60 and 120. And you can use really nice tools, which can be found just by Googling for a modal calculator, or you can directly choose this MROC one. And I really like this one because you can see, you get these lines showing you where the modes are. And then you can just, you know, scroll over it. And then you will also get displayed in this 3D view where the maximums are. So it's important, although you see two colors, so blue and red, both of them are showing maximums. They are using these two colors because if the modal field gets more complex, you will see a lot more of these zones, and then it would be impossible if it's not two separate colors. But don't get this wrong. So blue does not mean minimum. It's always a maximum. And then you can easily spot your modal influence in your room, and you can also get an impression, for example, is this mode, for example, responsible for somehow, for example, having too much bass in my front area of the room? Or, for example, is there a minimum then in the middle of the room? This is why we usually recommend to sit, in the front third of the room and not in the middle, because in the middle you always have the chance that there is a maximum or a minimum of a modal influence. So just use these calculators, enter your room dimensions, and you will get a really good feeling. What is the influence on your speaker system? And then, of course, the speaker boundary interference response. I already mentioned that several times, but I always will do it again and again and again because it's just very important, and it helps you to understand why you get these cancellations. And this is the easiest example. You have a speaker standing at a distance from the wall behind it. Bass is omnidirectional, so the bass frequencies hit the wall, are reflected, and then they add up to the direct sound. So you have direct sound, you have reflected sound, and if you have 1/4 of a wavelength here, so which means that the complete path is 1/2 of a wavelength, so 1/4 plus 1/4 is 1/2, and then it cancels out completely. And this is why you see these dips at certain frequencies. And this can easily be calculated if you just, do the math or use a tool that, for example, 1 meter distance gives you a notch at 86 Hertz. And you can see the complete range here that is marked red is critical, because this is exactly the bass range of most of our speakers. So starting at 90 Hertz, and a lot of our speakers can easily play down to 45. So you will realize that you have to be really far away from the walls, that this is lower than, the lowest bass frequency your speaker can produce. And if you get closer to the wall, then somehow this dip moves upwards. And this is, of course, better because in these ranges, the speaker is already more directional. So you just don't get that much reflections. And the dip is not that deep anymore. So this is the reason. So just make sure that, as you know, in the biggest studios, you always still see speakers that are flush mounted. So they are built into the wall. This is still somehow, in German, the gold standard. So, the best thing you can do for acoustical reasons. And if this is not possible for you, try it out to have the speakers close to the wall. And if you hear some laughing in the background, this is just my daughter, who is also discussing room acoustics with my wife. Let's see who wins. If you want to try out different positions, you should drink some water. You can make life a little easier if you just go to Group Preset, Edit, and then just, only measure one speaker, for example, or only measure the subwoofer. So just open your group, edit, and then you can just command click on the speakers, or you can, of course, click on them and just set the group status to off. So they are still there, but they are not in the group anymore, and they will not be measured. And then it's just way faster to just, do your calibration. And especially spend time for the subwoofer. Because as said, you can just, for example, compensate for problems in the speaker's response. You might have seen this diagram. I just discussed it with Izzy from the US. that we really should change that diagram because it's a little confusing. Somehow it looks like that you should not have the speaker close to the wall. And this is, of course, wrong. This small part here with minimum 5 centimeters shows that, of course, it's good to have it close to the wall. You should then avoid the distance between, up to 1.1 meter. And exactly what I have shown you before with the SBIRs. If you have the speaker in here, in that range, you are not, you're getting cancellations that are not within the range the subwoofer could cover. So therefore, it makes sense to be close to the wall or to be then further away from the wall than more than 1 meter. Because then it's just exactly the range that the subwoofer can cover. I think the next example will explain this in more detail. If I have a really good response from my subwoofer up to 100 Hertz, then of course I can make sure to compensate for a notch in the speaker at 60 Hertz. This is then easily possible. And that's just the thing. And you see this one, for example, is placed at 1.2 meter. This is where this is coming from. And then the diagram you just saw makes sense. But of course, even if you have a subwoofer, you can for sure place your speakers close to the wall. This is still a good approach. What we will show you in the grade report that is not visible in GLM is the response from both speakers, or from, let's say, from a group of speakers. And this just helps you to see how similar left and right look like. Because as you know, for example, the perfect phantom center. So you have a recording with a vocal. The vocal is panned into the middle. And this is absolutely stable and clear in the middle only if the speakers somehow give you the same response frequency-wise from left and right. Otherwise, it can shift slightly. This is just the case. So because somehow our brain gets fooled by giving you the same information from left and right, and then our brain tells us it has to be in the middle. But our brain is smart, so if there are colorations from one side, you might hear this vocal somehow shift to the left or to the right side. Also dependent on the frequency range. For example, the singer is just singing at that moment. What we also don't show at all in GLM, and this is of huge importance, is the so-called time domain analysis. And this is also what we are always talking about when we discuss, what can you do with calibration and what is not possible with just, filtering stuff. And unfortunately, you can't do anything about the time domain. So the time domain is the domain of room acoustic treatment and of proper architecture and just studio design. This is where these things are really, really important. The first thing we show is easy to understand. This is just the time of flight. So easily spoken, just, is there a difference between left and right speaker that should be compensated? Usually in the stereo system, as you can see before, after, exactly the same. Both speakers somehow have their biggest peak here at 0. And of course, this should be the case, because if you make sure that you have, for example, equilateral triangle, and you are sitting in the middle of the speakers, then of course the speakers should not need any delay. This is only happening, for example, if the microphone is not standing in the middle. And sometimes I also said this in videos. If I'm calibrating a stereo system, I usually just check this. So just by clicking on the speaker, and then you see time of flight, and then I set both to 0. This is usually the best starting point. For example, if you have a really, let's say, special setup, you are sitting on your keyboards and you are completely out of the equilateral triangle, then of course you can try out something like using time of flight and also gain compensation. If the microphone was placed there and GLM suggests it to do so, try it out. It can work fine. But for regular stereo listening, this is usually usually a measurement mistake, so that the microphone was not exactly in the middle, and then you get something like 0.1 or 0.2 here. Just delete it. With an immersive system, this looks a little more complex, United Colors of Benetton somehow. And you see there are differences. So you can easily spot we have these bigger peaks from different speakers. So you can see each color means one speaker, and they are not aligned at all. So for example, here, surround left is the yellow one, is not aligned with surround right. And after that, it looks like this. So still a lot of colors, but you can now easily see that the first peak of all of them, so the first direct sound, is now aligned. And the Great Report also shows this in detail, so you can just see the time of flight compensation for the different speakers. And this is usually just needed because in an immersive system, ideally the speakers should have exactly the same distance to you. And usually this is not possible if you just mount speakers on the wall, on the ceiling, and things like that. There's always some difference. And this is exactly what GLM also takes care of, that these speakers get a time of flight compensation and of course also a level compensation. Next important topic is called all early reflections. And I just added this here, 1 to 8 kilohertz. It's also written in the text in the Great Report. So it's, of course, explained in detail. But we already discussed about the bass range, and the bass range is influenced by the modal structure and, of course, the speaker boundary interference responses. And we have dips and we have boosts there. And the early reflections somehow are now more of interest for the higher frequencies, because we are now looking at things that come really shortly after the direct sound. So for example, let's say I have my speakers on the table and there is some screen that somehow is a little bit in the sound field. Then I will get the first signal from my tweeter. This is my direct sound, and it will be reflected by this screen as well. So just let's say 2, 3, 4 milliseconds later on, I will just get the reflection. And this is exactly what's shown here. So this 0 defines the direct sound, and then how loud is a reflection. And then you can see there are just some spikes here. For example, this one is just marked with 1 because this is the only spike that is in the range of minus 10 dBs, which is already acceptable. But in general, for example, this one looks okay because you can see there's a really smooth decay. So, the things are just somehow running out. And compared to that one, this is from a living room where there are a lot of reflective surfaces. For example, also lamps, can be of huge interest. And of course, windows. Windows are the worst thing ever. Of course, we all need some light, but acoustically, a window is a nightmare. And usually every window should just be equipped with a good acoustic curtain. Otherwise, it's not usable. And you can see there are a lot of reflections in the first range. So this shows up to 5 milliseconds. So really things that are close to the speaker. And also in general, there is not this nice decay. So it's not getting lower. It almost stays on the same level. And what's happening here is that due to these, let's say, second sound paths, so that we have not only the direct sound, but also 2, 3, 4, 5 reflections of it, we just get so-called comp filters. So it will just also cancel out in certain frequency ranges. And this will cause what you can see here. This looks a little bit like a comp. This is where this name is coming from. And just to be not too physical here, in the end, it's coloration. So the sound is just no longer true to the original. The sound is colored. It's a little bit like, you can easily try this out if you just also Google for comp filtering. There are nice examples on the net where you can listen to it. What you can also do if you want to try it out yourself, if you have a larger book, you start speaking and you just, change the angle of the book, and you will realize if there is some angle, it will start to sound a little strange. And this is exactly what early reflections do. And as you have seen, we show you, first of all, just how loud the reflection is and at what time it's happening. And then you also get this nice diagram showing you, once again, the gain, and then also the distance in centimeters and in inches, to get a feeling, for what is the difference of the sound path. So what is important to know, if you think about, for example, it's a screen, then you will have to measure distance from speaker to screen and then to you. So this is the thing. This is the so-called time in distance. Because, of course, we have one straight sound path from the tweeter to our ears. And then in relation to this is 1 millisecond later. And 1 millisecond is because sound travels at approximately 340 meters per second, is then around 35 centimeters. And to make it even easier, then you can also see the relation of this distance, that it can have an influence on this range. Yeah? This will not always be perfectly correct, because with early reflections, it's a really complex pattern. So it's always a lot of them just somehow combining and just building this effect. And it's not only, of course, this one we are looking at now, but it can give you a really good feeling for it. And as you see, this is indeed a region where there are some dips. Yeah, actually, of course, in an ideal world, this blue line would be here at the dip. But for some reason, there was some more interaction in this measurement. Yeah. And what can you do about early reflections? It's usually quite easy. First of all, make sure that the speakers are at ear height, so that they are not, for example, standing flat on the desk, pointing upwards, because then you get usually more reflections. And then also make sure that the sound field, so just, the space around the speakers, is just free. So if you have a screen, make sure, for example, to have the screen behind the speakers, or let's say at least at the same layer, but not in front of them. Even if it's a smaller screen, don't bring this in front of it. Also, sometimes it can make sense that you just think about, how many things do I have to place on my table that can be reflective surfaces, like, I don't know, smaller mixers and all of these things. Probably you can find a better placement for them if it's not in the direct sound field of your speakers. And if you want to hunt these reflections, so if you would like to know what is it exactly, you can always, for example, use one of these panels I have behind me, which is just some, mineral wool or Basotect foam, and just place this, for example, on your table and then measure again. And if it's then gone, okay, it's something there. And actually, tables are a huge topic. Somehow the more advanced people are, like mastering engineers, the more they care about tables, to be honest, because they know of this influence. For example, if you look at the studio from Morten Lindberg, he has a custom-made table, which is really small. So it's just the size he needs, but he tried to find a good option, that the desk reflections are not affecting his work that much. Because as you know, it's even more complex with immersive setups like 714, because we don't have one sound path, we have a lot of sound paths. So for example, if you use a curved screen, it can be the perfect focal thing, for top, surround, rear. This is then just exactly hitting this curved surface from the screen, and it's reflected back to you. And if you just do this, it sounds completely strange. So try to make sure that the sound field is free, and try to just, make it possible. You can also, for example, angle sometimes desks, so that they are just angled a little downwards. And this also already can be of huge help. This is a good thing about consoles, for example. Larger mixing consoles usually are angled downwards slightly. And if you place speakers on the meter bridge, reflections are not that critical anymore. And as I said, if you're struggling with windows and things like that, it's only one option, yeah, curtains, and then just heavy curtains if it's possible. So, the standard stuff that looks nice, this is the problem. Everything that looks nice is usually acoustically not effective. This is why we have a lot of discussions with other people living together with us in houses or in flats that I know exactly what would make sense acoustically, but then it would destroy the complete, feeling of this wonderful living room. I just had a discussion with someone who asked me, how can I improve the sound from my TV? And they had been using this wonderful, I think it's from Samsung. It looks like, a frame showing a nice picture, and it looks brilliant. So you don't think that this is a TV. It really looks like an image or a photograph hanging there. But of course, it's only that thick, and the sound is just, the bass is non-existent. And then, yeah, but they had not been happy with my recommendation that they should place speakers left and right of this thing. So, yeah, it's hard sometimes. This is just once again to show you how you can deal with early reflections. So this is the bad scenario. You can place an absorber there, which just, is capable of absorbing high and upper, mids, and high frequencies. So you don't need really thick ones. Panels like, I don't know, 10, 15 centimeters are perfectly fine. Or, of course, if you are, if you are living in an ideal world with wonderful architecture and a good studio designer, this is the reason also why we don't see parallel walls in studios. It's, of course, because of the modal structures, because the room modes always love symmetries, and it makes life harder for them if there are not that many parallel walls. But it also, of course, helps a lot with early reflections, because you can see if a reflection just hits this wall, it will just be behind you and not hitting your listening zone. Now, early versus late sound. Already talked about it in the beginning. So direct sound, this is the green curve, and late sound. So this comes after 20 milliseconds and later. And blue is just the sum of it, but usually just look at green and red and see the relation. This is an interesting example from my colleague Andy in England, because it shows exactly where standard acoustical treatment can work and how effective it is. Because Andy also has a really small room, and he used also a lot of absorbers. And you can clearly see, for example, these absorbers work, let's say 600-700 hertz and above, because the corridor gets really wider here, and it's a little, more narrow here, because the absorbers just don't do anything here. This is a nice example. This is a bad example, because this is once again a living room with no broadband absorption except a sofa. And you can see, actually, you are listening to the room at the same level as the direct sound. Still, this can sound nice, but this is, of course, not the best way, for example, to make mixing decisions. I always have to be a little careful, because, as said, if you're just a hi-fi enthusiast, I don't mean just if you are just enjoying, a great audio, you will still get a way better sound with a SAM system, because the bass, of course, still will be more precise. You will have more clarity. You will have, better sound color in total. Although you still, for example, have more diffuse sound from your room, because it's not treated and you're sitting further away. So this is just something I always point out. I always ask people, is this for mixing, or is this for mastering, for example, or is it for enjoying music? Because, to be honest, I'm using 80/20s in my living room at 3-meter distance. I would never recommend that usually, because the speaker is too small in relation to the listening distance. Still, of course, it's way more or way better than anything a soundbar would give me, or my fantastic Samsung screen. So this is just the way you think about it. If you are really focusing on critical listening, make sure you get a wide corridor here. Otherwise, you can still improve things by sitting a little closer, if it's possible. if someone has the chance to sit, let's say, 2 meters away instead of 5 meters, of course, 2 meters is better. There's no doubt about it. And this is, for example, it's one thing I also just captured because it's that good. This is one of the best measurements I received so far, especially because you see the corridor is huge in the, this is already the beginning bass range, 100, 200, 300. Very, very effective treatment here. And in addition, of course, the speakers are built into the wall. So it's 51 Bs, but, flush mounted with our flush mount kit. And of course, this is just perfect. So this system will always just show you what's coming out of the speakers. Now we have time frequency domain analysis. So this is somehow then the combination of it. And now for the first time, we see the reverberation time, a word every non-native speaker hates, especially also reverberant or the reverberance of a room. I don't know why Americans and English guys invented this, I think just to torture us. I will just ask him to try out our wonderful, we had one song that became a hit on TikTok. It's Barbara's Rhabarber Bar. So, so it's a rhubarb bar of a girl named Barbara. So this is then our revenge for that. But looking at this, I try to not, talk about reverberance that much. You can see, for example, in this example, the blue line is just above this corridor. The corridor in green shows usually the range it should be in. And the aim is always that, of course, bass frequencies are always ringing longer. So the reverberance of bass frequencies is longer than mid frequencies and high frequencies. But in an ideal studio, you try to have it similar. This is, for example, why this room only gets a 66% inside rating, because already at 300 hertz, it's a little too long compared to the recommendations. Once again, recommendations for studios. So this is also important. And on the right side, this is 75, although this corridor is already a little higher here. And in that case, it's not the ITU recommendation. So this one just somehow shows you, as said, the similarity between mid frequencies, high frequencies, and bass. So it somehow spots the mid frequencies, sets the corridor, and then just shows you the relation of the rest of it. And so even if it's a room that has a longer reverberance time, for example, 0.5, you would see the corridor just comes up, and it would still get a good rating, because this is not yet used with the ITU recommendations. I think easier to understand is the waterfall diagram. So if you just got it once, you will always be able to read a lot of information out of it, because a waterfall diagram shows you the frequency response, so from bass frequencies to high frequencies. And then on this axis, it shows you the time, so the decay time. How long does it take until this sound is no longer audible? And we define in the grade report this window as 500 milliseconds. And then it's very obvious. For example, here in this room, we have a really good and really flat. Flat is the wrong term here. We just have short reverberance times for the higher frequencies and the mid frequencies, which I think around 250. And then you can see that we have a few of these mountains here, and these are then usually the modal influences. So the frequency, for example, here at around 70 hertz rings longer, because as you can see, it just reaches the front panel. So this is longer than 500 milliseconds. But still, for example, this would be a controlled one, because I only would have to take care of this one. The next example is once again from a living room, and especially 100 and above, you can see, everything is just longer. You see here there is nothing longer than 250, and here a lot of things are 500, 400. So this room is just way more reverberant. So you would easily also realize it if you just start speaking in it, that of course there are more reflections, and that especially all of these reflections just ring longer in the room, so the decay times are longer. And this is also where this term comes from, decay of room resonances. So once again, how long does it take? And you can see, for example, 40 Hertz and the T60 time, so until it's 60 dBs lower, would be 0.88. And then you see, for example, the higher frequencies like 130, they already are shorter. This is also just because of physics. One more very good example, because as you can see, this is now even below 100, really short. And actually, there's only one really huge modal influence left. And this would be shown here. For example, it's only 40 Hertz. Yeah. And as said, if you just would be a millionaire, then you could ask someone, hey, can you just do some room treatment for me to just kill 40 Hertz? Because this is expensive, really expensive. Otherwise, of course, just use the calibration. And it will not reduce this completely, but it will make it better for sure, because just the 40 Hertz are not boosted that much anymore. Yeah, and this is also just another way of looking at it. It's once again the modes, which frequency, which gain, so which is the boost, and then the decay times. So also quite useful if you just want to think about what could be done with broadband absorption. For example, for what you could use a so-called tuned bass trap. This is where I would look at. And the wavelet is also just another way of showing also reflections and the energy in it. So for example, you can see there are a lot more spikes here on the right side, which means there are a lot more early reflections, and the reverberance of the room is way higher. This one is more controlled. So this is just, see 1, 2, 3 here. Actually, only 2 of them. Sorry, this one is direct sound. And also, for example, the range here around 1K is better controlled because you don't see that much red here. So if you want to check out the wavelets in detail, just read through the paragraph in the great report. It's not the easiest tool, I would say, if you just look at it. But if you're getting used to it, it usually just shows you things quite easily. It's somehow a combination of a waterfall, because I can see this influences, and also, of course, of early reflections. But I still would think that the waterfall is easier to use. Because I spoke about acoustic treatment, for example, this is now something you could use to just reduce the reverberance of your room in the bass range. And if it's a product, for example, by JK Acoustics, it always should show you a diagram that just gives you somehow the specs. So every product should be measured. So they do it in laboratories, and then they show you, for example, this bass trap gets really effective in the range, I would say, starting at 80, and it's most effective between 100 and 200, 250. And then you can just, think about, does this make sense for my room? Usually, yes. Usually you cannot have too much broadband absorption in a room. It's really hard to get a room that really dead dry. But usually it helps with everything if you just control the energy in the bass. And this is the thing I also mentioned, the so-called tunable bass trap. It has a membrane inside as well. And this membrane is tuned, so it's just effective for one frequency. It's just about the size of the membrane and also the damping material and things like that. And what's interesting to see that these bass traps that work with membranes are very effective in the range where they are tuned to. So here it would be 80 Hertz, and they are less effective than in other ranges. This is just the compromise you get out of this construction. So the blue curve is the full range bass trap, and the red curve is the one with a membrane. But as I said, if you would see, okay, I have a problem at 80 Hertz, and I would like to reduce this, this would be exactly your product. Absorber panels, just to somehow kill the early reflections. Of course, they are not effective in the bass range because they are not that deep, but they do a perfect job, as you can see, starting at 500 and upwards. So just go for these things if you want to treat your sidewalls, also the ceiling panels, yeah. Usually also you can bring down the complete reverberance of the room if you just place a lot of them. So sometimes it's really not critical to, to find out, is it 10 centimeters to the left, 10 centimeters to the right? It's just that there is a damping material there, and that helps. If you're treating the early reflection points, of course, you can use this old trick. You're sitting in front of your speakers. Someone is just holding a mirror at the wall, and it's just moving. And the moment you see your speakers in the mirror, this would be your first reflection point, and there you should place one of these absorbers. And finally, the hardcore stuff for the ITU RBS 1116 compliance, which is just a studio standard, so a recommendation that should be fulfilled by studios for critical listening. And now we talk about corridors that are defined. So they are no longer dynamic like the one you have seen before. These corridors are just set, for example, for the frequency response. And 100% compliance would mean that the complete range of the speaker is within this corridor. You see here, one speaker is just a little outside. So you could discuss what's happening at 700 Hertz. Sometimes it really only could be that the speaker height should be changed, or that there is a larger surface that causing a reflection. And then you could also get this one to 100%. Strongest early reflection, once again, you already know that. Now it's just somehow rated, because everything that is above -10 dB should be reduced. That's the thing. So ideally, there is no early reflection above -10. This is why these are shown here. And once again, the reverberation time, now in relation to the room size you entered. So this green corridor is defined by the room size you entered before you calibrated. And then you can see, are your speakers within this corridor, or are they not within? So you can also see there's always a target decay time, and this is based on calculated room volume. And of course, the calculated room volume is based on your dimensions. And so in the end, you also get this nice ITU recommendation summary. But as said, this is the hardcore thing. Not everyone has to fulfill the ITU specs, that's for sure. Cool. And it's 63 minutes. I'm almost on time. So I would once again like to mention that, of course, you can always ask us about things, about findings, about ideas under support@genelec.com. And you can, of course, also send us grade reports. We don't do in detail acoustical somehow guidance, or for example, we don't do the job of guys like GIK Acoustics, but of course we can tell you about the basics, and then we might just ask you, get in contact with them, because especially, for example, GIK, they accept the grade report. So you can just send them our grade report, and this is all they need. In the past, they asked you for room EQ wizard measurements. Of course, this is still also possible, but if you have a SAM system, you can just send the grade report directly to them, and then they can give you basic information for free. And of course, they can also assist you in just planning your treatment for your specific room. And they are not that expensive. So that's really a good starting point. Otherwise, of course, if you are in the range of being a really professional mixer, mastering engineer, then usually the guys to talk to. I won't name them now all because a lot of them have almost, I don't know, centuries of experience, and it's absolutely impossible to somehow copy that knowledge into, let's say, a tool or into a software giving you recommendations. But all of them agreed, so we just, of course, talked to some of them, and they really like this because it's really obvious what you have to do. It's helping customers to understand what they do, and still, of course, they have exactly the knowledge how to implement things the best way. Perfect. I would now say I just go back to my StreamYard. Yeah. And now, are there any? There are. Perfect. So let's just change this. Last time I realized I was always looking downwards, which is not nice. Does recommended RT60 values change with the entered room dimensions? If not, where do the recommended values come from? Yes. So first of all, the RT60 values, they change with the room dimensions if it's in the ITU section. And if you check the specs from the ITU, they clearly define how these should look like. And the ones we are using before that, so when it's about, how similar is bass to mid-range to heights, is also defined. And I would really, I would just have to tell you, just check this. In the great report, there's a nice text explaining this in detail. Because actually, I don't know where these recommendations come from. This is, I'm out here, sorry. But you'll find out. Is there any plan on charging for every time I generate a great report? No. As I already told you, there will be a plan that you have 12 reports for free, and then you can buy, let's say, for example, 5 more reports or 10 more reports. I reached out to our business manager today, but she's on vacation. That's absolutely fine. So there are no clear details at the moment, but I'm pretty sure there will be just packages like 5 reports or 10 reports, and that's just the thing. But believe me, it won't be expensive. So it's not that you will have to pay 50 euros for a report. This is not happening. It will be absolutely acceptable. Recommend to update GLM4 to version 5. Yes, of course. I think there's no, to be honest, exactly. Let's put it that way. So the calibration itself did not change. So if you're just using regular SAM speakers and you calibrated them with 4.2, you would get exactly the same results with GLM5. There are a few, I think, useful options in GLM5 now regarding things like, startup level, maximum level restriction. You can also have a more flexible power management. For example, in the past, it was not possible that the speaker switched out automatically if you use the digital group, because the IES clock is always there, or if GLM was running, GLM just was online, and then this prevented the ISS mode from becoming active. And but what's a really cool new feature with 5.1 now is that we have a new woofer cal. A woofer cal is used for W371s and also for the 8381. So the moment you are working with 2 woofers, woofer cal is part of the game, and the new woofer cal is so much faster and also more reliable compared to the old one. So this, I think, would make sense then. And of course, in general, it always makes sense to just have the recent version, also because of firmware updates. And yeah, I think Does Gray tell you where to place the acoustic treatments in the room? Positioning? No, because this is absolutely not possible, because Gray does not know your room. So it does really not know the symmetry of your room and where there is a door, or for example, if you can use a corner for bass traps, or if it's not possible because there's something else, no chance. So you will always have to submit the grade report, for example, for someone to do the planning, and then also add photos or just, some sketches of your room. Grade is really intelligent, but this is unfortunately impossible. Perhaps with AI in the future, I don't know, then you can upload a photo and our AI acoustical consultant will then give you the perfect placement. Will you be posting a recording of this talk I missed a lot? Yes, for sure. It will be available, I think, on our YouTube channel, usually tomorrow or even after that recording. So you can, of course, check everything, Rick, in detail. How does autocal relate to out of phase? It's important to run both, and why does out of phase only allow one speaker to pair with the sub? Very good question, Matt. First of all, autocal is about the frequency response. So you will get the filter set, for example, to compensate for boosts, and that's what autocal is doing. Out of phase is a second step that is only available if you are using a system with subwoofer, and this is just to make sure that at the crossover frequency, for example, you selected 85 Hertz, then you will have to make sure that at the crossover frequency, the speaker and the subwoofer is in phase. And now I already used speaker and not speakers, because you only can calibrate the phase with one speaker. Otherwise, it's not possible. And the process itself is just like this. So the subwoofer plays 85 Hertz and the speaker plays 85 Hertz. And then we are just, making sure that it sums up correctly at your listening position. For example, if you're using analog subwoofers, you will have to do this manually. And then we always ask you, for example, dip switch 1, and then make sure to find the position where the sound plays the lowest. So we ask you that it's completely the lowest because it's easier with your ear. And in the end, we switch by 180 degrees so that we have the maximum. Because if this sums up correctly, then of course it's the maximum level. And out of phase is doing this automatically and just switches through it with usually, I think, 15 degrees, and we'll just find the correct setting. And usually, Matt, you should pick the speaker that is closest to the subwoofer. This is the best way of doing it. And usually, in a lot of cases, the stereo speaker system is almost on the same layer. So there would not be a huge difference if you, for example, just do the phase calibration with the right or the left speaker. And this is just to make sure if this would not be in phase, you would see a dip at the crossover. So if you measure a system with bass management, which is not phase aligned, then you see a dip at the crossover. And this is also the reason, I will add this, that you will have to redo the phase calibration after you change the crossover. Yeah, because then the speaker will play back, for example, 100 and subwoofer 100. That's the reason. Yeah, first of all, thanks. You would have liked it to be a bit more geared to professional users. Can this be done? It can be done for sure. Just write me an email and then we'll do a one-on-one. It's no problem. And I was just reading that Matt is asking, I was going to ask which speaker to pair with. Myself is in the corner, so close. Yeah, exactly. Then if it's closer to the left, then pair it with the left one. Correct. All right. I just see one more here from Jörg Stagge, sounds German. How you then calibrate system with 2 sub, one works for top in Atmos and the second down speakers. Yeah, and that's possible, Jörg, because you can just use individual bass management. And then, as said, you will just somehow pair the sub for the bottom layer with the speaker that is closest to it, and then just pair the second one, which is doing the ceiling layer, with one of the ceiling speakers. That's how it is done. Yeah, and I just thought exactly you have a 714 system, then of course everything is a little more complicated. That's for sure. Also, for example, for the complete treatment and the planning of a studio, because sound is coming from everywhere. So usually you just had spots that had not been critical because it was a stereo system. And now, for example, I don't know, a surround left speaker is firing there, or the ceiling, of course, is of huge interest because there are speakers as well. So this was really no joke. I'm doing, one-on-one sessions in Zoom on a regular basis. So if you just are interested in it, just write us an email, and that's absolutely possible. It's fun to do. Okay, if there are no more questions, then I would like to thank all of you again for joining the webinar, and for also just asking your questions. And hopefully, there was some interesting information in it. How can we contact you? Yeah, support@genelec.com. That's the best way of doing it. Yeah. There's just one more thing I'm confused about. At all of your speakers get a TC, that seems unlikely. Yeah, let's just have a look at that. Have a look at that at detail. This is for me, it's always fascinating, that we get all of this information just out of sweeps. This is, physics are sometimes stunning. you play back a sweep, it's recorded, it's processed on a server, and then you can talk about, early versus late and early reflections and waterfall diagrams. So this is really impressive. So, and once again, hats off to our R&D department, because as I said, I'm a huge fan of it, and this is just really a great tool. A great tool. This was one of the insider jokes at Genelec for some time. Yeah, great webinar and a great tool. So I think that's enough. And if system temp get too high, system temp? System temperature. Oh, this is a really good question. I never had this. Usually it's impossible that the speakers get too hot. That's a really good thing. Usually I think there should be a red LED, but to be honest, I don't know. I can try to find out. I will try to find this out. I don't know where you are working. Although they are coming from Finland, usually they are pretty capable of also doing higher temperatures. It's not a problem. Yeah. Perfect. So once again, thanks a lot. As said, you can check this out again in the recording, and support@genelec.com. And have a nice evening, have a nice day wherever you are, and see you next time. Thank you. Hi all. If you want to find out more about our new 9320A SAM reference controller and how to configure it with the Genelec Loudspeaker Manager software GLM5, please check out our video on the Genelec YouTube channel.